Hi, welcome to the IDRC Recruiting 101 Module Lesson 3, the Migratory Agricultural Worker. The Migratory Agricultural Worker is a critical part of identifying student eligibility. Recruiters must be able to conduct eligibility interviews and determine if there is a migratory agricultural worker in a wide variety of situations. This module looks at the regulations governing what is a migratory agricultural worker and tips for the interview process. To begin with, let's look at what the non-regulatory guidance says is a migratory agriculture worker. According to Chapter 2, Question C1 on page 15 of the non-regulatory guidance, a migratory agricultural worker is anyone who in the past 36 months made a qualifying move and within 60 days of the move engaged in new qualifying work that is seasonal or temporary work in agriculture. Or a migratory agricultural worker can be a person that made a qualifying move, actively sought new qualifying work but did not engage, and has a recent history of moves for seasonal or temporary agricultural employment. In both of these definitions, there are many words that you might not be familiar with. And over the course of this presentation, we will be reviewing the definitions and exploring what each of the key words means so that you can better understand what is a migratory agricultural worker. But let's now talk about why migratory agricultural workers are important. Determining if there is a migratory agricultural worker is an important part of determining student eligibility. A student cannot be deemed eligible without making a move with, to join, or to precede a migratory agricultural worker, or without being a migratory agricultural worker themselves. The migratory agricultural worker is one of the, if not the most important part of student eligibility, and should be the first thing recruiters look for when trying to determine if a student is eligible. To determine if someone is a migratory agricultural worker, a recruiter must conduct a thorough interview with the potential worker to determine their move and work history. It's important to know that a recruiter may have to ask multiple times and ask follow-up questions to get the complete work history. When a recruiter is conducting an eligibility interview and trying to obtain the work history, we always recommend that recruiters try to go back at least 3 to 5 years in their work history to try to explore and see what the person has done. You may have to ask the question multiple times in different ways, just because sometimes people might be confused about one way that you're asking it. And of course, as the course of the conversation goes on, you begin to build more and more trust with the person that you're interviewing. And so answers may change as people become more familiar and more comfortable with talking to you. And so even if upon the first initial questions, you get a no, or they don't seem like they might have done any qualifying work, continue to be persistent, continue to ask, and try to change up the way that you're asking about their work history, because you might get more information or a different answer. Now, a tip from a recruiter out in the field. When interviewing a potential migratory agricultural worker, you should always be sensitive about their family's needs, their culture, and any potential language differences. Always try to wear appropriate attire and have proper identification to help the parent worker feel more at ease. Oftentimes, conducting eligibility interviews is all about being able to gain trust in the moment. And so you should do anything you can to help build and establish that trust. Always be respectful of their home or their time. And like the recruiter said, make sure that you're dressed in such a way to put the family at ease and that you have proper identification to prove who you are. Now for some tips to help you identify if there's a migratory agricultural worker. Recruiters should always be as thorough as possible in their questioning to ensure that they are not missing any important information. As we mentioned, recruiters should always review work history going back up to 3 years and sometimes even more to guarantee that no qualifying work has been done. Always keep asking those questions and digging back to find more and more information. Be sure to write down notes, and if you need to help you truly understand their history, draw out a timeline where you can keep track of everything that they've done. Now, a tip from a recruiter just like you. The recruiter says that agricultural workers work very long hours, many times 7 days a week. Sometimes the best day to contact them may be a day that the weather is bad, such as when it's raining outside. chances are they will be home and you'll have a better chance of being able to talk to them. Make sure that they know that you value their time when talking to them. The regulations governing who is a migratory agricultural worker are found in Chapters 2, Section C, or pages 15 through 20 of the non-regulatory guidance. Recruiters should always review the non-regulatory guidance at least once a month to refresh themselves on regulations. It's important that recruiters keep their knowledge sharp so they can be making proper eligibility determinations. Remember that one of the most important tools a recruiter has is their knowledge of the eligibility guidelines. When you're trying to figure out who can be a migratory agricultural worker, it's important to know that migratory agricultural worker can be anyone from the child's mother or father, a guardian of the child. The guardian does not have to be an official legal guardian. They only need to be responsible for the child. A guardian can be a relative or a sibling. The migratory agriculture worker could also be the child's spouse, or the child themselves can be a migratory agricultural worker. Now let's talk about what is qualifying work. Qualifying work is defined in the non-regulatory guidance in Chapter 2, question C3 on page 15. Qualifying work is the shorthand term to mean any work that meets the requirements listed in the non-regulatory guidance to be considered temporary employment, seasonal employment, or work for personal subsistence in agriculture or fishing. To be considered a migratory agricultural worker, the person must engage in new qualifying work soon after making a qualifying move. The term engage is an important and key term. A worker is considered to have engaged in work when they have physically performed the work. Being hired for a job or signing a contract is not considered to be engaging in the work. And so for a person to be considered a migratory agricultural worker, they must have physically started performing the job. Just because a worker has signed a contract, been hired on, or told that a job is available does not mean that they have engaged. If you find a worker who has been hired on but has not begun to do the work, it's important that one exception to the rule of engaging is in the case of workers going through training or orientation. On the Federal Office of Migrant Education Programs policy question and answer section of their results.ed.gov website, it states that the Federal Office of Migrant Education considers a person going through training and orientation to have engaged in qualifying work. And so if they have been hired on and have begun going through orientation, but have not yet performed work out in the field, they are still considered to have engaged in the work. To be considered a migratory agriculture worker, the work also has to be considered to be new. The worker has to have engaged in new qualifying work. This means that if the person moves and continues their employment at the same location, the work is not to be considered new. And so even if there is a change of address for where the person is living, if they continue working on in the same farm, in the same capacity, the work is not considered to be new. Another key definition in determining if there's a migratory agriculture worker is soon after the move. According to the non-regulatory guidance, the migratory agriculture worker must engage in the qualifying work soon after the move. The guidance states that soon after the move means the worker engaged in the work within 60 days from the date of the qualifying move. If the worker does not engage in the qualifying work within 60 days, the recruiter must include a comment on the COE explaining why they determined that they are a migratory agricultural worker and why the person did not engage in work within 60 days from the date of the move. Now we're going to talk about what the term seasonal work means. Seasonal work is any agricultural or fishing work that occurs only during a certain period of the year because of the cycles of nature, and that by its nature, the work may not be continued or carried on throughout the year. Many farm jobs, such as working in crops or working out in the fields, are inherently seasonal work because it can only be conducted when certain weather conditions are met. Some examples of seasonal work that you might find include things such as planting tomatoes, picking apples, sorting pumpkins, staking tomatoes, cleaning fields, freezing strawberries, transplanting trees, harvesting lettuce, pruning grapevines, or packing blueberries. If work is not considered seasonal, then it must be considered temporary in order to be considered qualifying work. Temporary work, as defined in the non-regulatory guidance in Chapter 2, Question G6 on page 30, is any agricultural fishing work that can be conducted year-round or any series of jobs for a single employer that lasts longer than 12 months. Some examples of temporary work include feeding chickens, milking cows, mending hog pens, slaughtering cattle, milking goats, sorting eggs, sorting oysters, birthing calves, defeathering chickens, or even harvesting mushrooms, since mushrooms are often a year-round crop. And so if somebody is engaged in harvesting mushrooms, the work must be considered temporary. And now another tip from the recruiter in Idaho. It's important that you get to know the employers in your area that hire agricultural workers. Always try to take tours of the facilities if possible so you can get to know them more. You will gain a lot of knowledge in the production of their products and have a better understanding of exactly what work the workers there are performing. It's always good to know as much as possible about the places people will be working because it helps to make your job easier. Now for an activity in the workbook, knowing the agriculture around you. It is important for recruiters to know about the different types of agricultural work in their area. Now, after talking a little bit more about what migratory agricultural workers are and what seasonal and temporary work is, go to the activity in Recruiting 101, Lesson 3 in the workbook. Use Google and the tools listed to conduct your own research to create a list of the types of agriculture and agribusiness in your area. Your list will be helpful when you get out and start recruiting in the field, as it will be a great starting place for places that you can visit to potentially find families and students in your area. A person who did not engage in qualifying work may still be considered a migratory agricultural worker if they actively sought qualifying work and have a recent history of moves that resulted in temporary or seasonal agricultural employment. In this definition, actively sought means a person has taken positive actions to seek qualifying work soon after the move or within 60 days of their move. A person may look for qualifying work before or after the qualifying move. Examples of having actively sought qualifying work include having applied for a job that is qualifying work, applying at a center that coordinates available temporary or seasonal employment, or even moving to an area having reasonably believed that qualifying work would be available. For a person to be considered to have a recent history of moves, they must have made 2 moves in the previous 36 months that resulted in qualifying work. When a recruiter is looking for a person's history of moves, the moves must have occurred within 36 months from the date of the eligibility interview. And so when you're conducting the eligibility interview and looking to see if a person has that history of moves, it's always important to start from the date of the eligibility interview and work backwards through their history until you get to that 36 months. To review some of the definitions that we have learned during this presentation, agricultural work is any work that is in the production or initial processing of crops, dairy products, poultry, or livestock, as well as the cultivation or harvesting of trees that is performed for wages or personal subsistence. Actively sought may occur before or after the qualifying move, but must occur within 60 days or soon after the move. Engaged means that the worker has their hands on the product and has started performing the qualifying work. Seasonal work is any work that occurs only during a certain period of the year and is bound by the cycles of nature. The work is not continuous throughout the year. Soon after means within 60 days of the qualifying move, and temporary work is any work that is done for 12 months or less. This concludes Lesson 3 of the Recruiting 101 module. To continue learning, read Chapter 7, Determining Eligibility in the National IDR Manual, located on the results.ed.gov/IDR-manual website. You can take the Migratory Agricultural Worker to test your knowledge of what you have learned during this lesson. Then continue on to the Recruiting 101 module, Lesson 4, Qualifying Moves, to learn what is a qualifying move.